And we are live. Good evening, everyone. This is the Same All Stay Circle. I'm here with Symbologist Michelle Snyder, and we're going to talk a little bit about symbols of leadership and power. But you didn't tune in to hear me babble, so I'm going to give it right to you, Michelle.
Hi, I'm Michelle Snyder, a symbologist, and you might ask yourself, wow, what is with the costume? Well, you know, symbols of leadership and power aren't always objects. Cleopatra is probably one of the best known symbols of female power in history. So I thought to myself, why not make this interesting? So we will discuss her a little bit later. I did my thesis at the University of Wales. I have a master's of philosophy and divinity. And I work with a colleague, Dr. Duncan Ensman. You'll see a little bit of his stuff later. I couldn't do this without him. My thesis was tracing the history of symbols way back into prehistory. For example, the RX symbol, which goes way back to the Ice Age inscriptions, and it means medicine lady. And I just was fascinated, and I began to ask myself how many more symbols go back that far. And so that's what got me going on this. Oh, and here's just a random thought. Your deeds create new facts. So while we're, my ear plug does not like my ear. Hold on one second. I won't be able to hear whatever I'm supposed to hear without it. So just while we're thinking about that random thought, you know, symbols can seem really mysterious to people. And some of them are, you know, some of them are meant to be very mysterious and hold secrets. And some of them are they only seem mysterious because we disregard the obvious. And that's one of the things that I will do today as we go through these. The show is Symbology, Leadership and Power. And so without further ado, I shall put on the spectacles that Cleopatra might have needed and might not have had. And I will come down here and we will start looking at pictures besides me. How's that sound? There. So with the miracle of technology, I'm talking to various people who are in different places on the globe. And the first thing I want to do is, before we can actually talk about symbology and decide what symbols mean, we really need to ask ourselves, what is a symbol? And I wrangled with this question for the whole time I did my thesis, because people have different opinions and there are even different official definitions of what a symbol is. But let's look at the fact that language starts with nouns, with things. And language is made of mental pictures in your head, abstracts of things. And so a symbol, in its basic premise, in its very basic definition, is an abstraction. For example, on the screen you see you in your toilet. It's a very important symbol. You need to know which toilet you should be in or shouldn't be in. Of course, that's been a big subject of controversy lately, but I have my opinions. And anyway, there it is, the symbol. You know, letters and numbers and sounds are also symbols. The house is a symbol. There are symbols for mysterious things. The all-seeing eye is a symbol. The sun and the moon, those are not the sun and the moon. Those are pictures which represent the sun and the moon. Therefore, they are symbols. So you get the idea. We have a communication system, and it's made of symbols. For example, this is not a pipe. You know, the symbol is not the thing. The description is not the event. The picture is not the thing. It is a symbol of the thing. It is a reflection of the thing. This isn't a pipe, it's a picture of a pipe. And Magritte seemed to know that. Okay? And it's a cardinal image of a pipe, a noun. So spoken and written words are symbols, and we use the spoken and written words and pictures to explain to other human beings our beliefs, our knowledge. We preserve our history, our traditions, and all of that in volumes and volumes of collections of our words, which are symbols. And so therefore a symbology is a communication system. And this is important to understand when we get to context, because, you know, the English symbology, we go to school for years. Our parents teach us for years how to be literate. And it takes a long time. And I bet you there's guys out there, there's people in this audience who have learned more than one language. And kudos, because it's tough to learn a symbology and you've done it twice or maybe 3 times. Some people know 5 or 6. It's a lot of work to learn an entire communication system. So we collect them into our symbology and share them with each other. And one of the things that we use very powerfully, but are not limited to culture, are archetypes. Archetypes are symbols that represent common human experiences that have been seen or experienced since humans were born. And mother and child, that has been seen since there was a mother and child. The moon and the sun has been seen since there were eyeballs to see it. And these are genetically implanted into our DNA, into our basic biological understanding of life. And so when you look at a picture of a mother and child, it doesn't take logic or words to understand its meaning. It bypasses all of that and goes straight to your associations. And these are not the only two archetypes. It's a huge symbol system, but they are very powerful because they are universal. And it doesn't matter what language you speak, you would understand what they are. Okay, now context, I mentioned, is really important because just like languages, you can't put a German paragraph in the middle of an English book and expect people to know what it says. So words are cultural, but so are pictures. This is you say ruler, but they're both rulers, the pharaoh and the ruler. And interestingly, the pharaoh and the king and people who are called rulers are called that because they are the ones throughout prehistory and history who have been able to measure everything. They had the tools and the skills and the knowledge to measure. And so they carried the staff and they did the measurements. And then, of course, we have the ruler that they measured everything with. This is what ours looked like. Theirs was different. The other kind of context is pictures that have meaning within a context. I was told that Masons must be pirates because the skull and crossbones is a Masonic image, but Masons use this skull and crossbones as a symbol of their mortality. I'm not sure pirates cared about that, but at any rate, it's out of context, and I did explain that to the person. A tree, the word tree, T-R-E-E, is an agreed upon, in the English language, symbol for what grows out of the ground with a brown trunk and a bunch of leaves. But in China, a tree would not be called a tree. So therefore, that verbal written symbol for tree is not a tree in China. They wouldn't understand it. Okay, so always when you're looking at symbols, ask who, what, when, where, why. I think I drove my mother crazy, and I think I'm a symbologist because I never stopped asking why. All right. We use symbols to express and depict concepts like pi, which is way too long to write. If you're a mathematician, you don't want to write that over and over and over and over and over and over. So we use a symbol. Much easier, and everybody knows what it means. See, it's an agreed upon meaning. And love. Love is too hard to write about, so we use symbols for love. These four are temperance, prudence, fortitude, and justice. And those are concepts which are easily symbolized. The symbols are agreed upon, and everybody understands the meaning of the concept that they represent. Symbolist thought permits an infinity of relations between things. So as each notion arises in the mind, the logic of symbolism creates a harmony of ideas. It's an enormous language. Very effective, very powerful. When looking at symbols, let associations flow and then put them in context and you will come close. So now let's get to some symbols. And before we do that, I need to help you with the paradigm shift, which is what history does all the time. I don't know about you, but when I was young, I was raised with these images and some that were done, much more realistically as to how cavemen lived. And this was reality. And I hate to disagree, but that was not so, unless maybe this guy's a Neanderthal. That might be. But let me help you understand how intelligent people in prehistory were. They lived through ice ages that were easily 70 below with wind chill factor on top of that for months at a time for thousands of years. They didn't just live. I mean, you can't go barefoot in an ice age. You may have 3 days. It's like Bangor, Maine. They have 2 seasons. They have winter and July 4th. So, you have to know how to survive the cold weather. So let me show you something extraordinary. Dr. Robert Duncan Ensman, my colleague, spent his 40 to 50 to 60 years designing rockets, and in his spare time, He collected and translated Ice Age inscriptions. He's the only one who's been able to do it, and I won't go into why he could. If you're interested, I can show you his extraordinary resume and set of capabilities which allowed him to do this. There are two inscriptions here. The one on the left, they're from 12,500 BC, and these particular images were found in the Gonnersdorf area, which is where Germany is now. They're published in Ice Age language, translations, grammar, and vocabulary by Duncan Ensmond and J. Robert Snyder. It was out in 2013, so the book is available. These are some images that are in it. It looks like a boot because it is a boot. And as a matter of fact, all the little lines that you see and the crosses, especially the one that comes down to the right with the 3 lines, that's probably a season. And the one above it is a Y shape, which means spinning yarn. And this will tell the person who knows how to read it what the boot is made of, how to find the animal that the boot is made of, when and where to find the animal that the boot is made of, and then how to process the animal for what you need to make the boot, and then how to make the boot. This is what this means. On the right is a loom. The green rectangle is an upright weighted warp loom. And in front of it, just to the left, the pink form, that is a woman, and she's holding the shuttle in her hand. The bigger lumps that are pink are the lamp, which is the one that looks like a lamp there, and the triangle of 3 little balls, those are her oil lumps that she puts in the lamp. Okay? And this is a very important image. It shows up thousands and thousands of times. It's not a random image. It's deliberate. It was a symbol they used to say something, to describe something, and they made quilted clothing, because without quilted clothing, they would not have survived in the Ice Age. Now, let me ask you a question. If you are in 70 below weather and it's windy and you're in a cave, and you light a fire, if you don't seal that cave off from the weather, you're going to freeze to death. But if you do seal the cave off, you're going to die of carbon monoxide poisoning. And so there were no cavemen. They didn't live in caves. They used them for community gatherings, and they had, like Lascaux, they left a lot of records there, but they never lived in them. So in this weather, they lived inside for several months when it was extraordinarily dangerous to go outside. And the mothers had their children in the house that they built, and they had the fire going. And she sat there at her spinning wheel spinning while she told stories to teach the children. This is where we get the phrase spinning a yarn, meaning telling a tale, because they did. They used oral tradition and images and symbols to teach their children while they were spinning, because if you didn't make clothing while you could, you wouldn't have it when you needed it. They couldn't go to Walmart. They made everything. So the other mythology that started way back here are the powerful norns, the ones that can snip the thread of life. Those norns had their beginnings here, because here the grandmothers knew how to tailor the clothing. They taught the mothers how to do that. The mothers would do the weaving. They would teach the daughters how to collect the windspin and spin the yarn and dye the yarn. So you have the maiden learning from the mother, learning from the crone, which I don't like as a word, so I believe it's matriarch. Maiden, mother, matriarch. But that is the triple goddess mythology and the Norns. This is another one. There's a book out by a Harvard professor that says there are no inscriptions of children in Ice Age inscriptions. There are no pictures of children. But I've seen too many to believe that. This is one. On the left, the yellow shape that says 16, that is the woman. The baby unborn is on top of her, the pink lump that says 1. Then you have the umbilical cord connecting them. And then you have the baby born. And the horses, which are also colored in yellow, are there because the horse was a very important source of food and materials for them. You can't digest protein without fat. You can starve to death if all you have is the leanest protein. So we make chicken soup to make people healthy. This mother needed something, and so they could only find fat in the Ice Age in the long bones of a female horse, a specific species of horse. And they made from her long bones what we would call horse soup or chicken soup for us. And it kept her and the baby healthy. Plus they used the hide and the fur and the tail and the mane to help make the cradle, the clothing, keep the house warm. So they thank, the horses are thanked here. But this is also, don't forget, this is an inscription that tells them how to do what. The other numbers and lines are the men and the aunts and the ladies that are helping with the birth and what they do and how to do it. And so our ancestors used symbolic language to record everything they needed for generations to know how to survive. So oral tradition, at the oral tradition of this, the winter solstice baby, the mother would teach the children, as I mentioned, with oral tradition. Their whole philosophy then was women and children first. So let's talk about oral tradition, which most people relate to folk tales and legends and fairy tales and mythology and, the songs of the bards and things like that. So let's take a look at one of the most well-known fairy tales of oral tradition, Snow White. We can learn an awful lot from this story. Let me see if I can point some of this out to you so that you understand not just the images, but the stories of power and leadership, because it is a story of a power struggle. It absolutely is. It comes from a time circa 3000 BC, thereabouts, when one culture was wiping out another and usurping the monarchy. Snow White was the last child. She was supposed to inherit the crown, and the usurper came in and wanted her killed. Now, the picture on the left is the wicked queen, but she's looking at what is called the magic mirror. Mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? But actually, there's a lot of information that can be gained from that little poem, because she's really not looking at a mirror. She's looking at a lens. They had lenses then, and lenses were hard to make and hard to know how to use, but what they gave you was extraordinary information about the stars, the seasons, what time it was, and how to survive. And kingdoms that had these lenses were fought over. So astronomy, alchemy, and metallurgy can be learned from this story. It's a refracting lens that she's looking at, if you know the difference in what they were. So the dwarves are really the main characters in this story. There are 7 of them. They represent the villages of refuge that those who were being slaughtered would run to. They also represent Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, the Sun, Venus, Mercury, and the Moon, the 7 planets of antiquity. Which are also, those planets are also the basis for the names of our days, which were contrived by the Vanir megalithic mariners, navigators, when they studied the stars and broke the sky up into the time frames and the zodiac, which was much older. About 6000 BC, they named the days of the week, which are actually based on the apparent speed of those planets through the sky from slowest to fastest. That's a whole nother subject. But that's what the lens represents. The little men, the little 7 men, are sometimes pictured as, coming out of the mountain where they were mining, for good reason, because it talks about metallurgy. They also represent copper, gold, lead, tin, iron, silver, and mercury. The 7 dwarfs do. And so we know that they did metallurgy then, and what they knew and how they worked it, what they could work on. Most of this information is a collaborative effort between myself and Duncan Ensman to decode and get the information out of these stories and these images. So in this story, the Wicked Witch tries to kill off Snow White in several ways. One is with a comb, but the comb actually represents death by metal, like arsenic. They had it then, and they used it on each other. They put it in their water, and they killed entire cultures and villages that way. Once she took a bite out of an apple, and she was almost dead, not dead, according to the end of the story. The apple represents death by organics like cyanide, which they also had and put in the water. Now, in one story, one part of the story, some people are not as familiar with this, she gets her laces laced up so tight that she can't breathe. That represents death by airborne gases, which they also knew how to use. And it also takes us back to the three norns, the maiden, mother, matriarch, the spinners, making their yarn. And it goes back that far. Alludes to the Ice Age weavers, that story. So when we are thinking about oral tradition, there's a lot to be learned in every story. And I did a book, Fairy Tales Uncovered, which really takes a lot of the elements out of the fairy tales and takes it back to dates it to where that element of the fairy tale came from, if you like that sort of thing. Now, one of the most powerful things people could do in prehistory was find north. You can't know where you are if you don't know where north is. It's fundamental to astronomy, to any kind of travel, to knowing where you are. It's just the axis of the Earth points at true north. It's called the axis mundi in esoteric language. The Polaris, if you can see here, this was an animated slide, but it won't work for you guys, so I'll just show you this part. If you look at the Big Dipper, it points right at Polaris. Now, Polaris is only going to be the North Star as long as the tilt of the Earth allows it. So the precession takes us having true north between Polaris and Vegas, which is opposite. It takes about 13,000 years for the Earth to do that tilt. Often, well, I'm sorry, 13,000 years between Polaris and Vegas, and then 13,000 back to Polaris. So in this 26,000 great year cycle, sometimes true north is a dark space in the sky. I know that Masonic north is considered dark. That's very interesting. They needed to know how to draw the circle and divide the circle to find the center in order to find true north. And they could do that. 10,000 years ago, they knew how to do that. Astronomy and geometry, while we're on the subject, from my understanding, are a big part of Masonic symbolism and ritual. Astronomy is the study of the lights in the sky. And it's considered by many cultures, ancient Greeks are one, that light carries knowledge. Think about it. We consider good ideas bright ideas. Intelligent people have a brilliant mind. Not so intelligent people have a dull mind. The word enlightenment has light in the middle of it. Powerful, enlightened ones are depicted with halos around their heads or rays, which are an indicator of light. So learning to see leads to revelation and unlocks secrets. Learning your geometry makes you an enlightened one if you're a master. In those days, if you could predict a total eclipse, you were a wizard. I mean, it just wasn't something everyone could do. Pythagoras recognized, and from astronomy comes geometry. About 6000 BC, the Vanir navigators discerned astronomy and geometry came from that, and we'll go into that again in another slide. From geometry, we can see a lot. Pythagoras recognized sacred geometry as the patterns on which creation is set. The golden mean is said to be beautiful. It is what produces beauty. My colleague, who is always nudging my brain, says, so then what is ugly? Anyway, sacred geometry is the patterns on which creation is made, and Masons are encouraged and surrounded by geometry and astronomy. It's, from what I understand, I know it's in the lodge, it's in the ritual, it's in their teachings, it's in their symbolism. If it's based on sacred geometry, and if you are learning to see, and you can, then we can catch a glimpse of the divine by seeing the sacred geometry in creation. I think that's worth doing. So let's look at a Masonic symbol. This is, in its totality, is a symbol of the knowledge and understanding of astronomy. when you look at a symbol, always count the patterns. Look at the relationships between things. Patterns are very important, and a symbol that's done correctly doesn't have just random patterns for decoration. You know, Hermes in the Emerald Tablet said, "As above, so below," and people go into the microcosm and the macrocosm. And yes, all of that philosophy is true, but really what it means is if you can read the stars above, you will not get lost on the earth below. So this, if you look at this symbol, there are 7 stars, which allude to the days of the week. And I'm telling you what I see in this. I know that Masons are told what their symbols mean in their ritual, and it is in context for Masons. It needs to be understood in context for you guys, but what I see in this is what I will share. The sun and moon represent regularity of time. The pillars are north and south. Now, if you have 2 pillars that are north and south, and you do that by, at night, you can go out and you can place a stick between yourself and the North Star so that your vision is lined up straight. And then you back up and you place another stick between that and the North Star so that you and the 2 sticks and the North Star are all lined up at night. Then, during the day, when the shadow from, which stick? When the shadow from the southern stick hits the northern stick, it is the meridian height of the sun. So the same thing is true if your pillars are north and south. The pillars are north and south. That means not man-made noon, but at the meridian height of the sun, the southern shadow, the pillar from the shadow from the southern pillar will touch the northern pillar. If you look at the shadows from the pillars on the mosaic pavement, it can gauge the passing of time. It's a geometric pattern that's very accurate, and it's a clock. Now, we think of power and we think of gods and goddesses. They are very powerful. Their mythology is full of really powerful, just extraordinarily, unnaturally powerful beings. So let's look at Venus and find out where she came from and why she's so powerful. Notice she is rising from the sea, and I will not go into all the explanations of the rest of this, but it's important to see that she's on the sea. I made a funny S-E-E-S-E-A. Okay, about 6,000 BC, the megalithic mariners, and there were megalithic mariners, and they had already sailed around the globe by this time, discovered the Venus clock. They discovered that in 8 years, it makes a pentagram with where you can see Venus, what's the word? Venus and the sun, conjunction with the sun as it's viewed from Earth. It will make a pentagram. And the transits of Venus as seen from Earth make a pentagram in 8 years. And in 40 years, it'll be back where it started. So every 8 years, it makes a fairly accurate pentagram, and in 40 years, it's perfect. And they knew this. And we set the Earth's clocks until about 1976 using Venus. That's how accurate she is. Now, the reason that Venus is a goddess is because it was women who discovered the clock. They discovered how to use it. They devised the geometry which was necessary to calculate longitude using Venus and Sirius, and it facilitated their navigation, which facilitated trade and defense. It was a powerful secret to know, longitude.
9 months on.
And she spends 9 months on either side of the sun. 9 months rising and on one side, and 9 months rising, setting on the other side. And I find that number very interesting, especially since Venus and Mars had a baby called Cupid, which explains, Mars being the god of war, explains a hopeless romantic running around with a fistful of arrows. But it's an astronomical symbol. Okay, so the tarot cards, pentacles, they are representative of wealth because of Venus, because the pentagram in the sky, because Venus allowed incredible trade. because of navigation. If you can get around the oceans, you can do a lot. And there are 72 degrees between the points. 40-year perfect cycle. 5 points in 8 years. Those are all sacred numbers. And there's much to be considered there. Okay. So in the lodge, there are some tools that go back into prehistory, plumb, level, and square. You know, this is extraordinary. To me, plumb, level, and square is truth. It's the only truth. It either is or it isn't. And there's no opinion about it. So if I can simplify truth as plumb, level, and square, everything else is up for discussion. That's me. It's a universal truth that plumb, level, and square existed before there was life. It had to have, and they had levels and plumbs way back 60 and 70,000 years ago when they built huge structures which are still standing, and they're plumb. You can't do a plumb wall any other way. So they are ancient tools of power because those that knew how to use them had a lot of power. Then there's mythical leadership, mythical characters like Chiron. All right, this is from the Zodiac, which was devised way back, 80,000 BC or older. But we look at these mythical characters and, you know, there's a lot of, it's like mermaids and unicorns. Oh, they're real. No, centaurs weren't real. But to look at this, he was, if you look at mythology, he was an astronomer, a teacher. He taught people like Hercules, the man Chiron, which Sagittarius alludes to. By the way, Sagittarius's bow points at the center of the galaxy. One moment, please. Thank you. So Chiron was an exquisite strateger. He was a warrior, obviously on horseback with a bow. If you look at the three cardinals that this symbol is made of, you have a horse, a man, and a bow. And if you wanted to symbolize a great warrior like Chiron, this is probably how you would do it. And so, like a centurion is a leader of 100 men, a centaur is a leader of 100 horseback warriors. So this is what I mean by disregarding the obvious, because it's there. It's right in front of us, and we just need to know how to let the associations grow. And if this interests you, you can go back to read about Chiron in myth and the war that he had, and Hercules accidentally shooting him with a poison arrow, and the good deeds that he did, and how he ended up in the sky. And as we started this off with me dressed as one of the most powerful women in history, before we idolize, although she was powerful, there is no getting around that. Let me explain why she became such a powerful woman. There's a book called The 48 Laws of Power, which I've read. Law 26 says, keep your hands clean. Sounds like a good idea, but I don't mean washing them before every meal. Cleopatra understood feminine power, and she got involved with Caesar and Mark Antony at different times and used both of them to put herself in a position of becoming Pharaoh of Egypt. And they did her dirty work for her. They killed all of her enemies, including her sister. So she learned from watching her sister gain the throne by killing her father and imprisoning all of the sisters that she had. The people were outraged, and they rose up and they threw her out. So Cleopatra wasn't going to make that mistake. She had a warrior do all her killing for her, and she stayed in power and was was a leader of one of the most united Egypts in history. So now we have a person, not a myth like Chiron, although he was a person at one time, who is representing extraordinary power. Chiron is more of a symbol of leadership because he really was leading the men. Let's look at a couple of objects, the rod and the cord. And as you can see, it's imaged being shared or handed between and held by powerful kings in prehistory, and some of them are queens. This is a symbol that is very relevant. It symbolizes knowledge and wisdom. It's the standard measure of length, is what this represents. It's derived from the tools that were used by the megalith builders to measure time and distance. The rod, the cord, and the pendulum. The rod equals, it represents the Asherah pole for measuring stars. You put it down and you measure how fast the star came and went. They turned to do using 2 pillars, which was more accurate, but the Asherah poles and the menhirs and the single standing stones were used first. The cord represents the megalithic yard, which was the standard of measure used all up and down intercontinentally to lay out the blueprints, as we would call them, for the megaliths that are the astronomical observatories of prehistory. The pendulum was used for numerating time. Now, those who could predict the seasons, who could understand how to measure, who could organize and oversee and design the work it took to build those extraordinary megalith observatories, they were powerful people. And the symbols of the tools that they used became the symbols of their authority and power and stature in life. There's another one that's not as well known, but I happened to notice it when I was doing this research. The bare knee. You can go and look at a lot of these. There's bare knees on many of the prehistoric and ancient kings. And I noticed a similarity in an initiate. So I'm just going to put it out there. Decoded by Duncan Ensman, the one in the center is a king and the goddess Wisdom, both with bare knees. The bare knees indicate that they mutually agree to cooperate, to rule and govern together. Her foot on the lion denotes control of time. There are other symbols on her which are astronomically oriented. The one that's coming up from her chest and goes up into the middle is the Venus clock. I'm not sure what time period it denotes. So the bare knee is a mutual consent between powerful people. We all know the crown and the scepter and the orb as powers, as symbols of power in our culture. We just witnessed a new royal marriage. Fairy tales come alive. I love it. But these are all symbols that come from ancient tools, again. But the crown is a really fascinating one, and I was really, I was surprised when Dr. E and I went through this. The crown and the scepter and the orb are all designed to dazzle and blind anyone who gaze upon the royal figure. A's supposed to shine. So they're highly polished, highly jeweled, and very reflective. The scepter is a symbol of power from the Asherah pole. And the orb, if you look at it, is a symbol of the earth. And with the cross on top, 4 directions, it means that he has the rule over the globe. The crown is interesting. It encircles the king's head with dazzling light and is designed to create an aura of divine attributes around the one wearing it. Now, I asked Bob about this. He said, well, if you stand exactly on the right spot on a ley line, you glow. And you can chuckle if you'd like, but Kessler knew this. Have you ever seen Kessler's static ball? Not Kessler? What is his name? I'm sorry. Tesla. Kessler, no, Tesla. Tesla's static ball. If you've seen a static ball, it's the same principle. And so the crown was, but it takes a lot of calculation and a lot of knowledge of physics and geology to know where that point is that you can stand. And so again, we have people with knowledge of astronomy, and natural sciences and geology being represented as powerful people by their skills and by the tools that they hold. The other thing I would like to mention while we look at the gavel is that an object that has had some symbolic attachment to it is called a symbolon. Like a scepter is just a stick until the king uses it, you know, and a gavel is just a hammer, basically, until it's put in the hands of the person who has the authority. It then becomes a symbol of something. A gavel connotes authority. It's a call to action. It's a moment in time. And I thought to myself, why does everyone jump? It doesn't matter if you're in a courtroom or if you're in an auction or if you're in an Eastern Star meeting or at a Masonic lodge. When that gavel strikes, people do things. And that fascinated me. I said, why is that? Why is it the gavel? So I asked. Docky said the information on the origin of the word gavel is relatively non-existent. He traced it as well as he could back to the verb phrase to go. A mallet, which it looks like, was used by the Vanir megalithic astronomers, and we're talking about 5,000 to 6,000 BC, in the creation of a standard length of measure and to build the megalith observatories. They had to pound stakes into the ground to lay out the foundation, the design of the megalithic observatory that they wanted to build. So about 9,000 BC, they started pounding sticks into the ground. And so they took the stick, the person who's supervising the work and has the say over whether the sticks are in the right place or not, and uses the megalithic cord to measure, whacks it, and it begins the work. Hammer a peg, attach a cord, draw a circle. You can do that. I did it on a stage. You drive a stick, you put a string and another pencil or stick, and you can make a huge circle. So that's what they were doing. And then again, whack, and more work gets done. Today, whack, the gavel calls, and a master mason steps forward carrying the rod and the cord. You whack. It's a verb. It's a command. And it's prehistoric. So that is what I have for you guys as an introduction to the subject of symbology and to the symbols of leadership and power. There is the book that I've been mentioning, but the book on leadership and power will be out this summer. The other books that I have written on symbology are there. I also write fantasy fiction based on what I have learned. So I think I'm going to stop sharing now and see if we have something else I should be doing, like talking to you guys and answering questions. How did we do?
Sounds great. First of all, thank you for doing this for us. It's very enlightening, much better than I can do. And, you know, I think I don't look as good in a Egyptian garb. But, it was interesting. My background's in history. Before I went to the dark side, I became a lawyer. And I was always taught that the rods were a little more Freudian than you told us. Sometimes a rod is more than a rod, is more than a cigar. So it was interesting to hear them related to rather than a very masculine symbol, a more feminine symbol, these devices used to measure these feminine planets. So that was very interesting. I hadn't heard that before. But for our question, certain Masonic authors speak that there are certain universal symbols, like the circle comes to mind. Like in all cultures, in all places, there's the circle as a symbol of divinity. Helium, gold, all that fun stuff. And in your research, have you come across a universal symbol? It seems like you're more of the mind that there's very much cultural context behind these images.
Well, yeah, the circle is one of the shapes of sacred geometry, and it is one of the first shapes that was drawn 80,000 years ago. There is a symbol that was discovered in Blombos, which is in South Africa, for summer solstice, sunrise, and sunset. And it's a V with circles. I mean, it's there. The circle has been used to symbolize the sun and the planets for millennia. Right now, though, I mean, you could take the circle and put it in almost any symbol system. And there's circles in magic, there's circles in alchemy. And like I said, context is very important. The the circle can mean infinity, although that's not the classic infinity symbol. You take the Ouroboros, which is a circle. I think it's an archetypal shape. Yes. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, very. Someone yelled Stonehenge at me, which I believe is also in a circle.
Oh yeah, the megaliths were actually more elliptical. They figured out that because of the precession, and because the time was not accurate in their circles, the openings that they designed to represent or to see each passing season of the sun were different in size, because they finally went to elliptical, which is more accurate. Circles, you know, they had to compensate the size of the openings they were looking through in their circular observatories. That's a whole nother subject, and I could get you some information on that, but yeah.
Have any more questions? Anybody? Everybody's shy, everybody's eating. Well, thank you again, and where can we catch you next if we want to hear more about symbology?
Well, I'm going to be at the Grand Lodge of New Jersey again on June 16th, I think it is. It's on my Facebook page. I'm going to be talking down there. They're having an open session for families and women, and so they got smart and they want to do myths, legends, and fairy tales. So I get to talk about mermaids and vampires, which is extraordinarily interesting and will bring a big crowd. So I'm going to be down there dressed as an entirely different character. And you can schedule time to have me come in and talk to lodges and present in person, but that's my next scheduled event, is at the Grand Lodge of New Jersey.
Oop. And if anybody is more interested in more information, if you go in the show notes for this, right below this video, we have a link to your Twitter, Facebook, Amazon book list. All that information's right there. So I encourage people to go buy all the books on the list and, you know, maybe do a little more reading.
Yep, I think that the revision, if you're interested in the general field of symbology and the kind of information I've been talking about, Revision is a great book to start with. It goes through this and so much more. That there's a short encyclopedia in the back where I decode a lot of beasts and symbols and characters. Another book that's written differently, covers a lot of the same material, is Hidden in Plain Sight. That has chapters on things like alchemy, heraldry, magic, the Green Man. It's done by, it's done by a subject matter, and the bros that have been really into the esoteric side of things have loved that one. So those are two that have been very popular. You can get those on Amazon.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And until next time, this is the Same All Study Circle with Symbologist Michelle Snyder. And everybody have a good night.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure and an honor. Have a good night.